By the time Octavian stood unchallenged at the center of Roman power, the Roman Republic still technically existed. The Senate still met. Magistrates were still elected. Laws were still passed in the old republican forms. But the system that had governed Rome for nearly 5 centuries was already hollow. Power no longer flowed from citizens through institutions. It flowed through armies, money, and control of debt. Rome had not been conquered by a foreign enemy. It had been financially exhausted from within. This outcome is usually explained through personalities. Julius Caesar's ambition, Pompey's rivalry, the Senate's corruption. But those explanations describe symptoms, not causes. The deeper force that destabilized the Republic was not a single man or moment. It was a financial system built for small wars that collapsed under the weight of permanent conquest. War debt did not merely strain Rome's economy, reshaped Roman society, redirected political loyalty, and ultimately made republican government impossible. To understand how this happened, it is necessary to step backward to a time when Rome's system appeared stable, rational, and even resilient. For most of its early history, the Roman Republic was a city-state that fought limited wars close to home. Military service was a duty of landowning citizens. Soldiers provided their own equipment and returned home after campaigns that usually lasted a few months. This arrangement created a direct link between citizenship, property, and military service. A man who owned land had a stake in the state. A man who fought defended not only Rome but his own livelihood. The system worked because it depended on balance. War was disruptive, but temporary. Farms could survive brief absences. Debt existed, but it was manageable. Victory often brought spoils that offset losses. Rome expanded slowly, absorbing neighboring territories while maintaining its social structure. That balance began to fail as Rome expanded beyond Italy. The Punic Wars marked a turning point. Rome fought Carthage across the Mediterranean for decades. Soldiers were sent to Spain, North Africa, and the islands. Campaigns stretched from seasons into years. For the first time, large numbers of Roman citizens were absent from their land for extended periods. During those absences, farms deteriorated, crops failed, families borrowed money to survive. Roman law strongly favored creditors. Interest accumulated relentlessly. When debts could not be repaid, land was seized. This was not an accidental side effect. Wealthy Romans actively exploited the situation. Senators and equestrians, who controlled capital and courts, purchased foreclosed land cheaply. These lands were consolidated into large estates known as latifundia. They were worked by enslaved laborers captured in Rome's wars. The economic logic was simple. Slaves did not require wages. Large estates outcompeted small farms. The rural middle class collapsed. The Republic's wars were creating wealth, but that wealth was concentrated upward. The state benefited from conquest, but individual soldiers bore the cost. Rome had no standing welfare system for veterans. There was no automatic land redistribution, no debt forgiveness tied to service. Military obligation remained civic, but the financial burden was private. As Rome's territory grew, so did the mismatch between its military system and its economy. Soldiers were increasingly gone for years. Debt increasingly became permanent. The class of independent landowning citizens, the backbone of the Republic, began to disappear. This transformation reshaped Roman society. Dispossessed farmers migrated to the city of Rome, where they joined a growing population of landless citizens. They depended on irregular work, patronage, and eventually state grain distributions. Politically, they were citizens. Economically, they were insecure. Socially, they were volatile. At the same time, Rome's political elite became wealthier than ever. Senators controlled vast estates. They loaned money at interest. They dominated provincial administration, often extracting wealth from conquered territories. The Senate increasingly represented creditor interests rather than the broader citizen body. This is the core thesis of the story. The Roman Republic's political crisis cannot be separated from its debt crisis. War debt undermined the economic independence of citizens. That loss of independence eroded loyalty to republican institutions. When institutions no longer protected people from financial ruin, people turned to individuals who promised relief. The first major political attempt to confront this problem came in the 2nd century BCE, with the tribunate of Tiberius Gracchus. Tiberius was not an outsider. He came from one of Rome's most distinguished families. He had served in the army and witnessed firsthand the conditions of Roman soldiers. As tribune of the plebs, he proposed enforcing existing limits on public land holdings. His plan aimed to reclaim land illegally occupied by elites and redistribute it to landless citizens, particularly veterans. The proposal directly threatened senatorial wealth. Opposition was fierce. The Senate framed the reform as an attack on property rights and political order. When Tiberius bypassed the Senate and appealed directly to the popular assembly, tensions escalated. In 133 BCE, a group of senators and their supporters killed him during an election assembly. This was unprecedented. Political violence had occurred before, but the open killing of a magistrate over economic reform marked a fundamental shift. The message was unmistakable. Structural solutions to debt would be met with force. A decade later, Tiberius's brother Gaius Gracchus attempted broader reforms, expanded grain distributions, proposed new colonies for veterans, and restructured provincial taxation. Once again, the Senate resisted. Once again, violence followed. Gaius was killed in 121 BCE. Thousands of his supporters were executed without trial. The Republic survived these crises, but it was permanently altered. The precedent was established that financial reform could justify political murder. Debt remained unresolved. The underlying pressures intensified. As the pool of landowning citizens shrank, Rome faced a practical military problem. Fewer citizens met the property qualifications for service. In response, the general Gaius Marius instituted reforms that allowed landless citizens to enlist. The state supplied equipment. Soldiers were paid wages. Crucially, they now expected land or financial rewards at the end of service. This reform solved Rome's immediate manpower crisis, but it created a new political reality. Soldiers became dependent on their commanders for post-service security. Loyalty shifted from the Republic to individual generals who could deliver rewards. Debt was central to this shift. Land grants and debt relief were no longer legislative issues. They became tools of military patronage. The next major escalation came with Lucius Cornelius Sulla. When political rivals attempted to strip him of command, Sulla marched his army on Rome itself. This act shattered another republican norm. Armed force entered domestic politics. Sulla's victory was followed by proscriptions. Legal lists of enemies whose property was confiscated and whose deaths were encouraged. Debt was resolved through elimination. Wealth was redistributed violently. When Sulla eventually resigned his dictatorship, he claimed to have restored the Republic. In reality, he demonstrated that military power could override law. After Sulla, Roman politics became increasingly militarized. Generals raised armies with promises of land and wealth. Senators competed not only through debate but through force. Debt continued to destabilize Italy. Creditors demanded repayment. Veterans demanded compensation. The Senate lacked both the will and the mechanisms to resolve these demands peacefully. Julius Caesar emerged in this environment. He was deeply in debt himself, having borrowed enormous sums to finance his political career. He understood the financial desperation of Rome's lower classes and the fears of its elites. His rise was not simply a product of ambition. It was enabled by a system that had failed to manage its own economic consequences. When Caesar crossed the Rubicon in 49 BCE, he did so at the head of an army loyal to him personally. His victory in the ensuing civil war allowed him to implement limited debt relief. He reduced interest burdens and stabilized property claims. These measures won popular support but alarmed creditors. Caesar's assassination did not restore the Republic. It exposed its final weakness. The Senate could remove a man, but it could not remove the forces that had elevated him. Debt pressures returned immediately. Veterans demanded land. Creditors pressed claims. Another civil war followed. Octavian, later Augustus, emerged as the final victor. His success lay not only in military skill, but in administrative control. He regularized soldier pay. He settled veterans systematically, controlled credit and land distribution through centralized authority. The forms of the Republic remained, but decision-making moved to the top. The Roman Republic ended not with a declaration, but with acceptance. Stability replaced participation. Order replaced debate. The debt crisis that had destabilized Rome for generations was finally managed. But only by concentrating power in a single ruler. At this point in the story, if you are finding this breakdown helpful, consider liking the video or subscribing. These kinds of structural explanations are often missing from traditional history narratives. And supporting the channel helps bring more of them to light. The lesson of Rome is not that debt alone destroys states, it is that unmanaged debt reshapes political behavior. When citizens lose economic independence, their relationship to government changes. When institutions protect creditors over stability, legitimacy erodes. When financial solutions require force, power migrates to those who control violence. Rome's leaders did not intend to destroy the Republic. They repeatedly chose short-term victories over structural reform. Each decision was defensible in isolation. Together, they created a system that could no longer govern itself. War debt did not announce itself as a threat. It accumulated quietly year after year, campaign after campaign. By the time Rome recognized the danger, the tools needed to fix it no longer existed. The Roman Republic did not fall because it was weak. It fell because it expanded faster than its financial and political systems could adapt. Victory made it rich. Debt made it unstable. And instability made autocracy acceptable. If there is a final takeaway, it is this. Military success can mask economic failure for a long time. But when the cost of war is shifted onto citizens without relief, the political consequences are inevitable. Rome's experience is not unique. It is a pattern that is repeated throughout history. Whenever states prioritize expansion without confronting the debts it creates. If you have thoughts on this interpretation, leave a comment. History is not just about what happened. It is about understanding why systems fail and what those failures can still teach us today.